Far beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, nearly 2 kilometers down, there is a place where the Earth is actively tearing itself apart. Molten rock rises, superheated fluids burst from the seafloor, and entire ecosystems thrive without sunlight. This hidden world does not just shape life in the deep ocean, it also influences chemistry, biology, and circulation across the entire Pacific Basin. Today, we are taking you to that place on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, marine biologist and science communicator, here to tell you what's happening with the ocean, how you could speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we are continuing our monthly episode of Surfacing Secrets, Explore the Ocean and Know the Planet, a series created with Ocean Networks Canada to bring the deep ocean to the surface through science, story, and discovery. In this episode, we're going to be diving into the Endeavour, one of the most active and intensely studied hydrothermal vent fields on Earth. Endeavour sits along the Juan de Fuca Ridge off the coast of British Columbia, where new ocean crust is continuously being formed and where seawater is heated to hundreds of degrees before erupting back into the ocean as black smokers. To help us understand why Endeavour matters, how it works, and why scientists around the world are so focused on this site, I'm joined by two experts who know it intimately. Steve Mahaly is a senior scientist with Ocean Networks Canada and has spent more than a decade working directly with Endeavour through one of the world's only cable deep sea observatories. Lawrence Coogan, who's a professor at the University of Victoria and a geologist who studies mid-ocean ridges, volcanic systems, and the geochemical processes that connects Earth's interior to the ocean above. Together, we explore what makes Endeavour so special, how life survives in extreme conditions, and why this site influences the entire Pacific Ocean, and what it can teach us about the origins of life on Earth and possibly beyond. I can't wait for you to listen to this interview. So here's the interview with Steve and Lawrence. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Steve. Hey, Lawrence. Welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about the Endeavour?
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be so much fun because this is something that, it's such a big part of the Ocean Networks Canada. And, we haven't had a chance to really explore this. So we're going to take this time to explore Endeavour, the significance of it, what is so special about it, and why we love talking about it so much and why we like studying it so much. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So what we'll do first is we'll just start off just by introducing yourself. So, Steve, why don't you just let us know? Let us know who you are and what you do.
Steve Mahaly, basically senior staff scientist at Ocean Networks Canada, and my responsibilities are for Endeavour, or the work that we do at Endeavour. So that's the connection.
Love it. And Lawrence, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lawrence Coogan. I'm a professor in the School of Earth and Ocean Sciences at UVic, and I've spent my career working on various aspects of mid-ocean ridges. So that's my link to Endeavour.
Awesome. So why don't we just start off? Maybe Lawrence, you can start off. What is Endeavour? Like, what is it, so that people can kind of get an idea and get a picture of what it is in their head?
Yeah, so Endeavour's a mid-ocean ridge. So around the bottom of the world's oceans, there's like 65,000 kilometers of mid-ocean ridges, which are submarine volcanoes, and Endeavour's one of these in the northeast Pacific. Where new ocean crust is continually created, where seawater circulates down into that ocean crust and gets heated to 400 or 500 degrees Celsius before venting black smokers on the seafloor.
So this, like, for you as someone like someone who studies rocks and volcanoes and everything, this is your special. This is like the thing for you, right? This is the Endeavour. This is your thing to study.
Yeah, I mean, Endeavour is one of the greatest places on the planet to look at these because there's so much access through things like the Ocean Networks Canada Observatory and previous studies that people have been doing since the 80s there. So it's a really well understood area. And these are the most active volcanoes on the planet, even though we don't see them because they're covered by the ocean. So it's an incredible place to study.
Now, there are a lot of areas around the Endeavour that have hydrothermal vents and everything like that, and even just around the world. What sets the Endeavour, Steve? Why don't you just answer this one? What sets the Endeavour apart from other hydrothermal vent fields that are around the world?
That's actually that's a pretty important question. But basically, it's just the sheer magnitude of hydrothermal venting that's occurring there. That's a lot of people say, well, this one's a medium spreading. Perfect example of a medium spreading. Speed of spreading is in the middle, so you actually have time to have life forms make use of the hydrothermal venting and actually have a succession of ecologies there. But it's the sheer magnitude. There's an incredible amount. There's 5 major vent fields there. If you go down south on the Juan de Fuca Ridge, you get to other areas where you're in a caldera, and it's far less active in the hydrothermal, the actual movement of water through the crust, and it's unclear. Lawrence probably has a pretty good idea why it's so active, but I don't know. It is a very very special venting site. It could strictly, if you want to just go to the brass tacks of the whole thing, strictly because of the sheer magnitude of venting that's going there, and they're different from 2 kilometers away. Vent sites will have a totally different look to them because of the different geological water interactions that occur, and we're just scratching the surface of trying to understand what's going on there.
Unreal. And it's been studied for quite some time, as Lawrence said. Like that's pretty cool. Steve kind of opened up the question, Lawrence. I'm going to have you answer it. Why is there so much volcanic activity in the Endeavour?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd answer this question a little differently. And, we've studied such a small fraction of the seafloor. We don't actually know what most of the mid-ocean ridge network looks like. So there's very few places we've studied in anything like as much detail as Endeavour. There's just not the resources to study everywhere like this. So there may well, in fact, there are other places that are just as active as Endeavour, and then there are other places that aren't. And it's really a combination, like Steve says, of the crustal structure, so how the faults allow fluid to get into the seafloor, and just temporal variations or changes in the amount of volcanic activity over time. But I think there are other places that are similarly active. It's just that we don't have enough areas we've studied in detail to know how unique Endeavour really is.
Right.
But there are plenty of other places that are just as active for sure. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, apart from the volcanic activity, why is the Endeavour considered like such a valuable location for ocean science? Steve, do you want to answer that part?
Well, basically, it's close by. It's in our. That's what I go very fundamental. Lots of things are pretty fundamental. Like that. It's within our EEZ, our exclusive economic zone. We can get to it, and we basically, I think these vent sites, like Endeavour's only discovered in 1984, so this is a very new kind of thing that we didn't know about before that. It was postulated, speculated, but we actually didn't. The first vent, I can't remember, early 80s, Endeavour 84. They finally actually got Alvin down there. And so, there's a whole bunch of stuff, and there's a whole bunch of life associated with it. I mean, so it's basically, we realized the scientific community realized pretty soon that something had to happen. This is a very special area, easy to access. So it was made into a marine protected area quite, in the 2000 or so. So it was very quickly protected, because also what vent sites are basically ways of aggregating or concentrating minerals, and some minerals concentrated there's gold, there's copper, there's all kinds of stuff. So it's an ideal place to mine. In fact, like mines on the actual subaerial or terrestrial mines were old hydrothermal venting sites. So the Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto mine, the Red River, or in Spain, one of the first places where they moved out of the Stone Age, was basically a hydrothermal venting site prior to being a mine
I did
and
not
being on
realize
land.
That's it. Yeah.
So yeah, you're concentrating minerals in an area, and obviously, once you can't do that, if people want to come by and mine it. So
Yeah.
it's 2 kilometers down, so it's not that easy to mine. So the community realized that, and the fact that this had so much attention, and basically even the scientific exploration could be damaging to the actual environment itself. Uh, just
Right.
there's quite a if you go down there, we have quite a few things on the seafloor there, so we have to be quite careful on recovering our stuff and keeping the place
Yeah.
as pristine as we can.
With all this, like these vent fluids, they go all over the place. They go out, they shoot up into the water column, but I've heard that they can like be traced across the Pacific. Like, how can you trace that? And like, what does it tell us about these vent fluids, just in general, in terms of their patterns of how they spread out? Lawrence, can you answer that for that?
Sure. So, I mean, we trace it mainly by collecting samples, fluid samples from the ocean. And so you go out on a ship and you lower what's called a CTD rosette, an instrument that allows us to collect water samples. And then we bring them back to the lab and you analyze the composition of them. And you can see key element and isotope tracers that tell you that fluid has interacted with those hydrothermal fluids. And it's always at the same depth as a ridge. So it's about 2 kilometers depth in the Pacific, right across the Pacific desert region. And it's enriched in elements like iron. So that's the iron that's coming out of the hydrothermal vents. It's building the chimneys. But it's also been spread right across the Pacific. And people are really excited about that because iron's a limiting micronutrient in the ocean and parts of the ocean. So everything needs it for primary productivity. And so knowing we have this source of iron into the deep Pacific is really interesting to biological oceanographers as well as geologists like me. Yeah.
So these fluids go around like the bottom of the ocean. They kind of travel. Is it just because there's like these deep sea currents that take them around? How far off the hydrothermal vents will you get traces of that vent fluid?
You can trace it right across the Pacific. So 4,000 kilometers across the Pacific, these fluids have been traced. Yeah, and you can see that the
Sorry, I didn't mean to. That's through isotope analysis, like looking at the specific aspect of that vent fluid that comes from Endeavour.
Yeah, isotopes and even just the abundance of elements like iron,
Gotcha.
or even very small particles of the minerals that black
Right.
smoke that gets
Yep.
very diluted, but you can still trace those particles right across the Pacific too. It's incredible.
That is incredible. That is incredible. Now, with all that happening, you get the areas can be hotter in temperature in around these vents, and there's a lot of stuff that's coming out that we wouldn't be able to handle, like if we were out there, obviously with pressure. But even if it was at the surface, it wouldn't be good for us. But biodiversity is pretty high around Endeavour. Steve, why is it so high, and why is that such like an impressive thing to see around the Endeavour?
Well, probably it's hard to compare biodiversity as for terrestrial biodiversity. The whole ecology there is based on a totally different function. Basically, it's chemosynthetic based. So basically, it's the bottom layer, instead of being green plants, there is this sort of utilizing the chemicals that are coming out of the actual vent fluids to make
Right.
a entire ecological system. So the diversity is different. Like, it's totally different. It's nothing at all like what we have on. There's animals that have adapted to it. There's there's skates there. There's giant crabs that are white there and things like that that are living off these guys that are only endemic or only found in that specific area based on this chemosynthesizing process. So it's hard. Why is it biodiverse? Well, it's basically it's been around. We figure for at least 1,000 years there that this venting is happening. That's a rough guess of what, but it changes quite a bit. So right now we're going through a cycle that we believe for pretty simplistic reasons, it's a 20-year cycle that you have increased sort of activity. And that's going to change the ecology of one area and make it too hot for the animals that happen to be there. And some of them are not, some of
Right.
it is planktonic, so it can float around. Other guys are attached to something. And if it gets too hot, they die. If it gets too cold, they die. So so you have a succession of biology that can occur, and you know, adaptation processes that have been going on for thousands of years have built a
Mm-hmm.
whole different diverse community. And the more interesting thing about it is the fact, even though these are localized into certain areas, like the Endeavour segment sits 300 kilometers offshore, and the next section is well down the ridge where there's other
Yeah.
there's interconnectivity between the ridges.
Mm.
So they're showing that there's certain why are the same creatures living at Endeavour that are living somewhere else if they're not isolated, because the ocean itself,
Right.
as Lawrence was saying, basically it's interconnected along really long time scales. So
Mm-hmm.
basically the oxygenated water is ventilated in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and it sinks down. It gets cold, sinks down, and it ends up at Endeavour in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
It's about 1,000-year cycle. So it's going to go. It's all connected somehow. Generally,
Yeah.
when it's in the ocean, you're stuck with mixing processes that slow down the vertical sort of travel times, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why you can pick up these signals at the depth of event, many hundreds of kilometers away from the actual event site, because it's not going to go up and down. But it has no problem going side to side. It's once
Right.
it's got its neutral density, that's
Yeah.
where it goes. And these currents that we don't fully understand, because models aren't that concerned about the bottom of the ocean. The models are there
Mm.
basically to make sure that the atmospheric models are doing the right job, because that's the big reason. We want to know where we live, what the weather is going to
For
be,
sure.
not necessarily at the bottom of the ocean. So we often have a very confused view of what's happening in the deep sea. And that's a major area of scientific research that hopefully we're helping out by
Yeah.
this observatory that we have there.
Yeah, absolutely. When I also think too, like the biodiversity, like with the amount of different species you get there, and such a unique set of species because of the harsh conditions for your quote unquote regular species that we know and find around. I would imagine it'd offer a bit of protection from other predators around that, because those predators probably wouldn't be able to go into those areas to eat those crabs or eat those skates or things like that. Would that be a fair assessment?
It seems to be. I've never actually read any particular sort of thing, but those giant crabs, those white crabs that you might have seen,
Yeah.
if you pull a bunch of tube worms, for instance, which are full of
Mm-hmm.
blood, basically, and they're very tasty for crabs, but they're not on the actual
Ah.
venting sites. They don't go there. But when you go to sample it, you can't get back to back to your little trailer that you're going to bring it up to without these crabs chasing you down and ripping it out of your hands and trying to eat it. It's it's serious. They don't look like they're moving very fast, but they get there.
Right. Once they see that, oh, there's one.
It's just like, there it is,
Yeah.
and then they've got their, I don't know what, they can't see. They're just, that smells good, so they do
Yeah.
avoid it. Probably heat, probably chemicals. There's lots of chemicals, but I'm not a biologist, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Lawrence, you don't know how to eat. I just know they're never on the actual vents.
Yeah, no, I'm not a biologist either, so I can't really. I didn't know that about the crabs coming in to get the tube worms. So
Oh, they love them.
Got to get
They
those
love
tasty tube verbs. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're looking at just sort of what you mentioned, how things move, and like they kind of, like, you can see things happening over thousands of years, and how they move from ridge to ridge and stuff. Can you see, can you answer questions about just not only evolution of some of the species that are down there, but also just the evolution of the vents and the ridges that happen? What questions about, life and evolution can be raised through research at Endeavour? Lawrence, have you done any kind of like thought on that, especially when it comes to like how dynamic it can be with all these volcanic eruptions?
yeah, I'm certainly no expert on this, and I don't work on it, but I know of people who do. So Yeah, you can certainly uh, trace that there are different things live at different vents, and how interconnected the species are depend on how long it is since there was a straightforward geological pathway between one set of vents and the next. So, for example, if the tectonics changes so that one ridge gets separated from another ridge and there's not a direct transport for larvae between them,
Right.
then they start to evolve separately. So, kind of like uh, the islands at Darwin looked at the finches with different features on.
Yeah.
So as soon as the ridges get separated, then things can evolve separately in those locations, and people have traced that out and tried to help reconstruct when tectonic boundaries between these ridges first were created. And that can be on a small scale, or it can be on a much bigger scale. Like you find very different things in the Atlantic Ocean than you find in the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
So that'd be a very big scale. But yeah, even much more locally, you get those kinds of variations too.
One thing that's not often understood or known is the fact that there's a lot of stuff that lives in the crust. There's microbial. So what happens, even though it may not be, the pathway may not be in the oceanic currents, it's through the actual crust itself. So you have microbes in there. You have a new vent shows up. It spits out a whole bunch of microbial stuff. Basis of that, uh, uh, and that's the basis of the basically food chain. We've gone to eruptions that just occurred with a rapid response, and basically, as soon as we got there, which is a month, after things happened, these newer places were occupied by life form. So we don't know whether that was through the water column or through the actual crust itself. It seems like the crust has, we don't often appreciate the fact that there could be, similar amounts of species that live in the crust that we have on the actual planet itself. That their numbers keep on going up and down all over the place, I guess, and how many things live in the crust. And they have a geological role. They actually change. They use it's basically microbial activity. They grab a bit of this mineral and that mineral and get energy out of it and make a third, mineral like serpentine or something. Lawrence probably knows more about this than I do, so I'm probably sticking my neck out here. But I'm a physical oceanographer, generalist, salesman for Endeavour.
Yeah, no worries. Well, you guys are selling it. You guys are selling it well now. But what is it like? I'm thinking about the Endeavour, and it's like a number of ridges, but a couple kilometers down below the sea surface. What's it like when you start to, work on there? So you're going out on a ship. Like, what's it like to visit the Endeavour? Like, what's that? Like, what? How does that work? Like, in terms of a research cruise, can you just kind of just give the for the audience like a picture of how you go visit? I mean, we all can't go in an ROV, and I know that's happened before. But like, what's a typical research cruise that happens, like to do research on the Endeavour? Lawrence, why don't you start with this one?
Okay, Steve's better to speak to this than me because he's actually been there. But I mean, one thing that's great with ONC running the cruises out there now is that all of it's fully available. They stream all of this live,
Right.
so anyone in the world can be watching it. So, you'd board a ship and with an ROV and the crew, and then you'd head out just over a day's steaming to get to Endeavour. When you get there, then you locate yourself and you drop the ROV into the water. So using the A-frame on the back of the ship, and it takes, some hours to get down to the bottom. And then you'd have a van, basically like a shipping container with typically a whole wall of TV screens looking at all the different cameras that the ROV is projecting back. And you have the pilots for the ROV who are really skilled at manipulating both the arms on the ROV and finding where you want to go. And, that's a big challenge, is tracking where you are and where you want to go. And then, you'd have typically 1 to 3 scientists in there or engineers telling the pilots of the ROV what they want to do, where to go next, what the aims are. Navigation's a big thing down there. So, and you go about doing whatever you want to do just looking at these TV screens are just playing back what's happening in the seafloor. And like I say, anyone in the world can watch these, either using the Ocean Network's Canada playback facilities to look at ancient or past cruises, or watch it in real time next time that they're out there. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Now, Steve, you've been down there before, right?
Yeah. So in general, if it was a real science cruise, so we're basically going there, we're doing operations and maintenance, and science is almost, we have to do a certain amount of science to be able to properly characterize what we're seeing with the sensors. So but it's a limited role. Like in other cases, I guess Alvin was out there this summer on the Atlantis. That's a human occupied vehicle, and they would have a 2-week plan based on a scientific question, and then they would gather up the science people that were going to go on it. They get the funding from, in this case, National Science Foundation, and then the whole thing is concentrated on the science. With ONC, we're going out there. We're going to go to places on the slope. We're going to go to places near shore. We're going to all kinds of different depths to go, and then we'll squeeze in a 4 or 5 day thing at Endeavour somewhere in that whole sequence. So it's not, that is based on a number of predetermined dive plans that we make up. So this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to replace this. We're going to move this over there. We're going to do this. We're going to sample this thing here to characterize that. So it's quite structured. It can be because science is always good that way. Research, you basically want to be able to change anything in the last minute, because suddenly you see something unbelievable. Certainly, you're not going to not look at it.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
Because we have to now plug this thing over here. No, but it's still our funding is based on operating and maintaining a observatory at Endeavour and all through the Northeast Pacific. So it's not the classic science thing. So you'll have like me or 2 scientists on board doing 12-hour shifts, and we try to cover all the different bases. So we won't have a geological expert. We won't have necessarily a biologist. It's all over. You have to rely on your email contacts, Lawrence. What should I do? That sort of thing. You try to keep communications with the shore scientists that are the experts, and then you learn rudimentary sort of parts of many different fields. At least that has been my role anyway. It's just not jack of all trades, master of none. Well, currents, I can deal with the currents and stuff like that, but that's only one small little factor in what we do.
Yeah. So there's a lot of prep that goes into before these cruises are going out. You're looking at collaborating with partners like with Lawrence and other scientists that want to ask certain questions, and then you go down there with a plan ready to be adaptable depending on what you see down there, and then you go down and you try and do some maintenance on some equipment, check out some cool things that are around there at that time. Have you had any? Can you tell us like a time where you really saw some really cool stuff while you were down there?
Well, every time you go down there, so it's kind of a.
What's your most memorable? What's your most memorable moment?
Most memorable moment. Basically, these things are so fascinating. It's the first time we laid the cable, going in there and you've got that 5 meter kind of area where you've got really high intensity lights, but you can't see any farther. And so you're coming along, bumbling along there with a clear view of something very close up, and suddenly you walk right into the ROV flies into this field of these massive pillars, and you're going, wow, and they just come into view fairly quickly, and you're just it raises goosebumps on the back of your neck, right? It's so that whole thing, and then accidentally finding another one. Oh, this guy's here, and
right.
Again, because of the viewing, you can't really see that far. You don't get a picture of the whole story, so you're completely lost in this little maze. And the pilots who have been there a lot often know that stuff, or or to give, they actually put in a life-size cardboard, not cardboard, plywood cutout of one of the Alvin pilots, and we got to see it too. It was hung around for quite a while, and actually, what happened though, it floated around. So you come across this life-size man pointing at he was pointing. He was meant to point to give a size estimate of a edifice, and it's floating around. And so you run into that. That's pretty spooky down there. Or you see something. So it's kind of like that. It's not, what specific unbelievable thing. Sometimes a piece of a vent will fall off and break, and they grow all these. They're like geoids, where there's all bunch of crystals growing on the inside, and you don't. It come from an area where it looks like it's completely like a muddy, not that interesting thing, and you crack it open, and it's this unbelievable, it's full of lots of feldspar down, lots of really shiny things it's so dark in the background, and your lights are so strong. It's a fascinating kind of thing. There's a contrast thing that occurs. Anyways, it's not it's not an example, but it's every day.
Yeah, it's kind of I think it's a difficult thing to picture for people who haven't been down there, because I think a lot of times when we think of the deep sea, we just think of just, the thought that across us goes like a flat land, a flat bottom, not land, I guess, or bottom in this sea. And you're just like, oh my gosh, like what is happening with all this? And I think it's really interesting to hear that it's like there's these pillars and there's this like complexity of the bottom of the ocean when we're like 2 kilometers down, and you can't really see where you're going other than how far the lights are shining. How far of a distance do you think they go, like approximately the lights meters, where you can actually see it?
I always use 5 meters. It's an R cube kind of, it drops down really quickly, but yeah, it's not far. It's just slightly bigger than the actual ROV itself.
Yeah,
they got more cool lights now. You can look in the back, and if often we use a 2-body system where it has a clump weight, but it has some control, it has some lights on it, and then you have your ROV. So that'll be above you, and you'll be able to see the lights from a great distance. More than 5 meters. So. But all you see is a bunch of lights down there, and then you might be able to see what that light of the ROV is actually doing. So that's pretty fascinating. That's like Titanic stuff. You can actually similar to there. They have to reconstruct the whole thing in a number of photogrammetric techniques to show you, because you only see this one. Oh, there's the front end of the Titanic, and that's the same thing we're having in there. It's where we got this guy here, that guy there, and then you have to piece that together in your head and try to make the picture. And so that's one of the big research things that we're doing, is trying to put together an actual map of the area, because it's not, and this is a hard thing for a lot of the cartography people or GIS people, is that they don't realize there's the third dimension is just as important as the X and Y dimensions. In this case, it's just as vertical as it is horizontal. And there's 2 Z points. So you have an overhang, and you have, so what's the it's not easily mapped by flying over with the multi-beam and stuff like that. So you have to actually go in there and build these structures. I don't know where on land, Lawrence might know, but where there's that kind of structures, maybe in caves. Yeah, there's stalactites and, something, it's kind of like that. There's a lot of, it's not a flat, the flat Earth theory doesn't work there.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. One of the unique things about Endeavour is the amount of data that we have on it and the amount of science that we have. And that's because of this cabled observatory. So Lawrence, like, for you as a scientist, why is having this cabled observatory at Endeavour such a breakthrough for the work that you do and that you've seen your colleagues go through as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you think about trying to study a volcano on land, let's say, you wouldn't do it by going there, once every few years, in a looking only 5 meters in front of you at any one time and going down and maybe having like, I don't know, 4 hours to study the volcano, and then you come back in 3 years' time. So actually being able to do things in real time,
Yeah.
I can look up right now, what's the change in the temperature of the vents? How has that changed
Mhm.
in the last 24 hours? How has it changed in the last week? I can look at the camera footage and say, oh, look, that microbial mat that was growing like that has been eaten by something because it's got much smaller, or it's shed
Right.
into the water column. And those are the kinds of things you can never do if you're just going out intermittently collecting one-off data. So, we've got some really unique instruments now too. So we can, for example, sample that black smoker fluid,
Hmm.
350 degrees C fluid, on demand from just through the internet. So if something happens, if there's an earthquake, we know
Yeah.
there's been an earthquake because we've got the seismometers that are cabled. They tell us, oh, the ground just started shaking. Okay. Oh, yeah, this is a big earthquake compared to normal. Let's sample the fluid coming out the
Yeah.
vent and see if that changed at the same time. That's the kind of thing that you could never do with a ship. Even if we had the money to send a ship out after that,
Right.
it takes like a month or something to be ready to do it. So,
Yeah.
and in terms of understanding, how does the geology relate to the fluid chemistry and to the biology, you need to know how things at the time scale of those processes. Does everything change within an hour? Does it change within a month? Does it change in
Yeah.
a year? And you can't do that if you just go out once in a while to do things. So you need the real time data. So it's being quite revolutionary to have these cabled observatories.
Oh yeah.
So they don't solve everything. There's certainly
Right.
plenty of things you still need to go there and do the one-off sampling, and it's finding the good balance between having the cabled data in real time and
Yeah.
the collecting enough one-off samples. So yeah.
Well, that was going to be my next question. When we talk about gathering data, there's always like this is the information that I want. I want all these different things. We have all these different instruments that we know can sample, sometimes in real time, sometimes not in real time. Lawrence, are there things that you would love to see that are not on the Endeavour right now that you would love to have measured, and keep it couple, not the big list, because I know there's always a big list, right? There's always a big
Yeah,
list,
like
but
how long have you got?
yeah. So like I know there's lots of stuff that we can. You mentioned a number of things like measuring the plume and all these things in real time and seeing what happens after earthquakes and stuff. What would you love like on your dream list, like the biggest item on your dream list that you would love to see?
uh, yeah, that's a really tough question because my dream list is too long and I'm not sure what's on the top of it. But you know um I guess I'll give two answers if I
Yeah,
can.
for
One is
sure.
for everything to be working all of the time because it's just really difficult to
For
do
sure.
stuff on the seafloor. So instruments, however well engineered they are, don't necessarily last that long on the seafloor. And then you're not just on the seafloor, but you're trying to put things in these hydrothermal vents.
Hmm.
So it's incredible that anything works ever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and then you have to go to sea to maintain this. And if the weather's not good or your ship's not good for the weather state, then you can't do the maintenance. So it can be another year before. So
Yeah.
even with instruments out there in real time, you can still have big gaps in the data
Hmm.
if there's any problems with weather for the cruisers or for just instruments not working. So one would be to really, that'd be a big dream, is to have everything working all of the time rather than like X% of things working
Yeah.
all of the time.
Yeah.
The other would be um, having some kind of tracer to tell us um, about what's happening with the magma beneath the surface. So there
Mm.
are chemicals that we can look at, like carbon dioxide that's released by volcanoes, and being able to tell, like measure how much carbon dioxide is coming out of the fluids in those hydrothermal vents. That could be a real great way to tell us about magma
Yeah.
under the surface, because it's going to be, if we do have an eruption there, it's going to be really exciting to see how that impacts the entire system from the rocks through to the biology. And one of the key tracers for seeing that would be, yeah, a geochemical tracer for uh, magma, so like carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
but I could list another 20 things too. So
Well, I think you brought up a really interesting point. I've worked at sea a number of times, and I was a marine technician on a boat in the Gulf of Mexico. And even when we're at the surface, having like a surface sampler that sampled all the time, things would break. Just being in a dry area, just with having water circulating through it. I can't even imagine what it's like in the deep sea with all the problems. You're in a hydrothermal vent, for God's sakes, and you're sampling all these things. It's like you said, Lawrence. It's amazing that it works in the first place, but it's a true testament to the engineering and the placement and understanding the life that's down there and how it's going to interact with the instrumentation. Steve, working at ONC and being out in the field quite a bit. How does the staff sort of, adapt to putting these instruments into a place like the Endeavour to try their best to make sure that it works all the time, or it works just like it does right now, and providing information for people as earthquakes are going on and being able to see it live? How does that whole system work in 5 minutes or less?
Well, if you take, you learn, you slowly learn. But we have been going to these places since early '80s, and you learn simple things like, okay, lots of people think stainless steel, for instance, is a mighty good material, but at hydrothermal vents, it immediately disappears. It's like unbelievable, vanishing. So I say, oh, let's make a mooring, normally be galvanized steel or something cheaper like that. And then, this is really important, so we're going to use stainless steel, we're going to use beryllium, we're going to use all this stuff. And then it doesn't last for the year. The moorings are all on the shore, and we learn. And then you tell other people, they don't believe you. They make the same mistake. But so you eventually, it's interesting. So we put the first mooring out there in 1985, I believe, and lost all of them. And then basically, I was actually part of that. I looked at the data, but it's built up. So we know titanium works. We know plastics works. We know iron will, like this is the craziest, because it's a big iron reactor down there. You put a piece of galvanized steel that you paint, let's say you paint it red or something like that, and you got it sitting on you go back next year or maybe the year after, all that's there is the paint. You just touch it, and then the whole thing crumbles. All the iron is now this powder. So it's this red powder everywhere. So these things, they become very clear. Everybody knows, but it wasn't really predicted. I mean, it should have been predicted, but it's more of an experience thing. So you want to be able to have this, long-term kind of knowledge. So now there's no engineer at our engineering area that knows that we're not going to put in, stainless steel anywhere near the ocean. Basically, our first platform we designed. We still have the same design. Was made out of stainless steel, and we put it in Saanich Inlet, which is anoxic at a certain level. And it lasted. 6 months later, we pulled it back up, and whenever we had the stickers on, this is like you're trying to sell your operation. So you go down with ROV, take pictures of this thing. Wherever the stickers were, it was all the fact that you had another sticker on there lowered the oxygen levels so that stainless steel was eaten away underneath it. And then we can't use stainless steel. But we generally don't put things, the people who designed it were ROV pilots, and stainless steel and aluminum, that works great for ROVs because it goes in the water, you clean it off when it comes back up, and it's fine. But if you put something in there for a year or 6 months, it can't work. So it's all a sequence of trial and error. There's some engineering involved in there, but ahead of time. But often it's you'll say don't do that. That's not a good idea. And there's lots of MacGyvering that goes on on the ship to figure out how to do things. I mean, that's the big thing, is to be able to adapt right away as we are there, because that's nothing that focuses you. You're out there. I can't remember what the numbers are. A dollar, $1 a second, whatever. That's you realize you got to get all this done, or you're not going to get funded to do it again, because you're just going out there.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain to people that it's a really difficult thing to do too. So you want to have success.
And you have to be adaptable, as you mentioned. I think that's the unique part of the staff that works for ONC that goes out on these cruises, is you have to be able to adapt to any type of condition, any type of whatever happens, and you have to be able to put stuff together, like you said, MacGyvering it together, and be able to put it in the water so that it works properly. You can't just put it in the water and hope for the best. So I think that's a true testament to the staff, right?
It's not prescriptive. You want to have the dive plan. You want to know your plan is all there, ready to go, but it's not going to go to plan.
No, exactly. Now, one thing you both have mentioned over this interview is, you both come from different professional backgrounds, right? And that, we see that a lot with people who are using the data within like this whole context of the data that's coming up from the Endeavour. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on. Is there a lot of collaboration that goes on in the final studies? So Lawrence, do you collaborate with Steve to put a study together, or other people at ONC, or even other people within the scientific community that are studying this?
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration. I mean, Steve and I have certainly been involved in a whole bunch of different studies together, published a bunch of papers on different aspects together. And yeah, lots of people collaborate, and those collaborations range from, detailed collaborations that lead to publications with multiple people who have collaborated, all being authors like Steve and I, through to much more helping each other, but without actually being involved in detail in the science. So, for example, the biologists might be going out there and not know where things have changed recently. So Steve's been out there recently, maybe, and can tell them, oh, go look at this area because things have changed a lot there. That area hasn't changed. So there's a lot of collaboration like that that's much more informal, as opposed to being co-workers on a publication or co-workers on a grant proposal and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's hugely interdisciplinary. Everything we're doing, it involves people working right from the seismologists through the geologists, the fluid chemists, through to the biologists, the physical oceanographers. We all get together. We have workshops every few years where everyone gets together and catches up on what the latest is in every discipline. So there's a lot of feedback between things that way too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that helps like you said, you have an update on a study or an area that's changed. That helps biologists or other people to understand, oh, that's changed. Maybe I have these questions to ask and answer within that. But the Endeavour hasn't only just been like a diversity of professional background. It's been a diversity of people from all over the world: Canada, US, Asia, Europe. Like, how did the Endeavour, Steve, become such a global hub for researchers from those places?
It's it got lucky. It was picked as one of the 3 study sites that they had for a very large American-based program. Ridge. One was Ridge 2000, one was just Ridge before that, and so they had 3 sites, and that was one of them. So 3 integrated study sites. I can't remember which one's the other one. So it really focused a lot of work on these 3 different sites, and still, like if you take, like France works on they have an observatory in the Lucky Strike region, but that's in the middle of the Atlantic, so you have to go take a ship way out there. This is an interesting sort of side thing. This one's quite close to a very major port, Vancouver, Seattle, and major scientific areas. So it's right there. People can fly to Astoria or wherever, and you go offshore, only 200 kilometers, that's less than a day's travel, and you can actually get, these big international kind of groups can get together. Because the other problem is, I mean, Canada's a small country, so how many, I can count on one hand the scientists working at Endeavour. And we really have to rely on Americans. We have to rely on the French. We have to rely on, and then, the whims of those countries change. France wasn't going to support any kind of research in the Pacific because they want to concentrate on the Atlantic. So they do that, and now that's changing a little bit. So it moves around quite a bit. It's not. Canada sunk a bunch of money into making this happen. So we try to corral Canadian scientists who are
Mm-hmm.
working at Endeavour, and of course American scientists as well.
Of course. Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
basically you build it, and then people will come.
Absolutely. Yeah. Heard that. We've heard that before. That line before.
So it
But
just
no,
it got it. There was a path, and it just happened to be a path that ended up concentrating a lot of research in Endeavour compared to other places.
now, you have all these collaborators, and people have been working on the Endeavour, since the early '80s, and there's been a lot of scientists that have come through. Some have retired since, some have gone to other places. What happens when, a scientist or an expert like works on the Endeavour for like a long period of time, and then suddenly, they, as life is, they retire or they move on. Lawrence, like, have you seen that happen before? And like, is there a gap in that knowledge, or is there like a succession plan with like other researchers? Like, I know you probably have students that you probably have as graduate students. Hopefully they'll work on the Endeavour, throughout their lifetime. How does that work when someone leaves or retires?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's pretty informal. So yeah, it certainly happens, and there's obviously some information gets passed on because it's been published or it's been
Right.
written in after every or after most cruises. There's cruise reports come out that document things in there, but there definitely is a loss to the community when someone's been working in an area, retires, and that corporate knowledge of these areas, and especially because they're so dynamic, like Steve was
Yeah.
talking about earlier. Chimneys fall over, new chimneys grow. These things can grow at like a meter per year, even. So you see a chimney, and someone's saying, "I think that's X chimney," and it's only if someone's been there multiple times that they can really say, "No, that chimney wasn't there three
Yeah.
years ago." Uh, or that chimney, no, that's not that one because it used to be bigger, so it must have collapsed and a new one grown and stuff. So there is definitely a loss to the community, and it'd be good moving forward. The more of this, like again, Steve was talking about, that we can digitize, and so that's
Yeah.
readily available. When people were first going there in the '80s, the technology for doing this was very different than it is now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of the early maps were drawn by hand,
Wow.
because you didn't have, well, you still have pretty poor navigation, but you had even worse navigation,
Right.
and then sketching what things look like out the window of an. I mean, you've got a 6-inch wide window to look out from Alvin to see what's there. So yeah, so moving forward, the technology is definitely getting much better to try to um, document things much more clearly and have that available to future generations. But we definitely have lost as some of the people who were there in the early days have retired by now, and
Yeah.
that corporate memory is gone, and even different chimneys get given different names by different groups from around the world and stuff. So you're like trying to make sure, are they really talking about the same thing as we are, and those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a problem, and
Yeah.
it's a problem across all of science. So
For
to be
sure.
honest,
For sure.
yeah.
No doubt. Now, one thing that I want to kind of talk a little bit about, it might be literally out of space, but we always compare. A lot of times people compare like working in the deep sea to space, and here we have these hydrothermal vents that are very different from what we've ever seen before. We're still discovering a lot of new things. How does studying the Endeavour, help us understand like the potential for hydrothermal events on other planets or moons? Lawrence, I think that's a question for you on this one.
Sure. I mean, there's another number of different aspects to that question. Partly, just knowing about how these work on your own planet can give you ideas about what could be going on other
Mm,
planets. What are the key controls? What do you need? You need to have a heat source. You need to have hot rocks. It can't just be cold rocks, or else there's no drive for the rocks and the fluids to react with one another.
right.
Uh, and then there's other things like, okay, what pressure temperature conditions are actually conducive to these systems working? How would they work differently if you didn't have salt in the water? The salt
Mm,
in seawater plays a huge role in how these systems work. So if we start thinking about what could be happening on Europa, for example, where people think there may be hydrothermal systems under the ice, well, how would that work? What do we need to
mm-hmm.
know? So there's going to be a flyby mission that NASA are running in, I forget, 6 or 8 years or something, and
Yeah.
and a lot of the data that they're going to try to collect from these fluids that spurt up through the ice, those questions are driven by, okay, this is how we think those systems would work if they're working like Earth systems, and if the
Right,
ocean
right.
on Europa is different, then these are the kinds of observations we'd need to look for. What organic molecules would we have to look for in there to tell us that the temperature or pressure of the hydrothermal system was different, for example?
Right.
So yeah,
That's pretty cool.
it's fascinating to think how these things
Yeah.
could work on other planets. It's also very unconstrained, so it does allow you to have a lot of your imagination can come in as well as the science. But
For sure, for sure. Now, for Steve, you've worked on Endeavour for a very long time. Uh, why does the Endeavour keep inspiring like new generations of scientists? Why do you think like the Endeavour is sparking that?
Well, now basically because there's an observatory there that has basically a lot of footage, and right now we can go pull up a camera looking at the side of North Tower, and it's looking at a whole bunch of animals moving around there. So it's very accessible, and the concept. I mean, a lot of scientists like the idea of well, it breaks down, and there's a lot of scientists that are more like to be not going to sea, but a lot of people like to go to sea. And if you're
Yeah.
going to sea guaranteed well, except for this last year, which is really unfortunate, you basically get out there once a year, and that's a very compelling sort of thing. If you're a scientist, get out to your study zone once a year, you can get a lot of stuff done. So I think the regularity, the fact that there's this observatory there, and then has the fascinating, the stuff that I was just looking at Oceanography magazine. We just published something in June, and it's had a big hydrothermal vent picture on the front of it. Now I just realized the last one, which comes out every 2 months, so 3 issues later, it's got a hydrothermal vent picture right on the front of it too. So these are topics that are very
Yeah.
magnetic to when you start science as a student,
Yeah.
you want to get something that you can really drive you. Usually you'll find it, but this one's very easy to capture onto. It's
Yeah.
probably it's like studying whales.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody wants to study a whale. They're
Yeah,
cute,
for sure.
they're big, they're charismatic. This one is the charismatic rocks.
It's the iconic habitat right now,
Yeah,
right? It's
right.
what it's like the sea turtle and whale of the deep, which is great. And with that said, too,
Exactly.
is deep sea has been a big topic these days, just sort of in the general media. With talks of exploring the bottom a little bit more, trying to extract things. But we don't know a lot. Like if you ask most people who are listening to this, or just most people like the average person on the street, what do you know about the deep sea? They might say some things, and I want to ask Lawrence, like in your experience working in the deep sea, like what do most people misunderstand about these deep sea environments?
oh, yeah, it's a good one. I mean, part of it is just how little we understand about them. We know
Right.
more about the surface of Mars or the moon than we do about the bottom of the ocean. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't have decent maps for most of the bottom of the ocean. There are very few places that we actually know where the hills are. Like, we know if there's like a kilometer high mountain somewhere on the bottom of the ocean, but we don't know whether there's a 5 meter escarpment or something over most of the bottom of the ocean. And that leaves
Right.
us uh, yeah, just with so much still to learn about almost everything to do with the bottom of the ocean. So, you know, and people, I mean, I don't know if it's that people don't know it, but people don't really appreciate just the vastness. Like most of our planet is ocean.
Yeah.
The bottom of the ocean is way more important to the planet than the
Right.
continents. But we're a kind of parochial species who think more about the continents because we live on
Right.
them. But they're not more important for how the whole planet is. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think people also sometimes think that anything that happens at the bottom of the ocean doesn't really matter because it's out of sight and out of mind. And whether that is, it can be a dumping ground for pollutants, or whether
Yeah.
it's just that we don't have to worry about what's happening down there from the natural processes because it seems like it's a long way away. But everything we learn says it's really not. There's so much interaction between the deep ocean and the shallow ocean and the atmosphere that, we really have to care more and learn more. And in some ways, it frustrates me sometimes that the space community can get these massive projects funded to send out a mission to wherever,
Yeah.
and getting trillions of dollars, literally, and
Yeah.
yet to study the bottom of the ocean on our own planet, you'd never get that kind of funding. I mean, with that kind of funding, we could revolutionize how much we understand our planet. And so it's we're not selling things quite right, probably. But
yeah, true. And last question to you, Steve. What is the most surprising fact about Endeavour that you wish that everybody knew? Like everybody listening to this, what would you say?
Wow. Single fact that, well, it's sort of building on what Lawrence was saying is the fact that, sure, it's a geologic area. It's interesting. It's beautiful to look at. There's ecology there, but it's basically a passage from the deep, the crust into the ocean, and as previous statements by Lawrence, that affects at that level all across the Pacific. So this is a hugely formative to the ocean environment. So if things change there, the ocean will change, and we don't fully understand the implications of all this. It's shooting a ton of iron into the ocean, which iron does a whole bunch of interesting things as it floats around in the plume. But it's also it's this limiting macronutrient. If you stop that, what difference? So the connection between this sort of geologic area and the deep ocean. So if there's a volcano erupts on Mount St. Helens or somewhere, it affects the entire atmosphere and the planet.
Yeah.
And this is we have this happening in a much more regular, controlled way in the deep sea, and we don't fully understand that cycle. Or Lawrence understands it a little bit more than I do. But I think that's probably the biggest thing that it's a beautiful place, but it's basically pumping all this important chemistry into the ocean and controlling the chemistry of the ocean. Of course, you get it from the land too, but it's this huge cycle of that if we take it, if we mine it and pull all that stuff out of there, how will that change the chemistry of the ocean? Because that's the big reason we're focusing on now is basically for mining. So they're going to mine it.
Yeah.
If they mine it, that'll spread a whole bunch of that chemistry around in a much different way. And we don't have the faintest idea what it'll do. It'll be similar to burning fossil fuels, where it was a good idea way back then, but the implications were kind of pretty planet ending.
Definitely planet influencing.
So
I mean, this is great. Yeah. No, I wanted. This has been amazing to learn more about the Endeavour through your eyes and hear you guys speak about the Endeavour and all its different unique aspects. And I think this is a lot of fun to listen to. So I want to thank both of you, Steve and Lawrence, for being on the show and sharing your wisdom and your experiences and everything. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence and Steve, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on and really dive in almost physically to the Endeavour and finding out what the Endeavour is all about. It's something that is very special here in Canada off the coast of the British Columbia coast. It is something that we don't really talk about enough, I feel like. And when you go over to the website, Ocean Networks Canada's website, oceannetworks.ca, you can actually take a look at live cameras deep down in the ocean near and around Endeavour, looking at different slopes, the Campbell River, Cascadia Basin. I highly recommend that you go and check out all these different places because you can see these live cameras ready to go and showing you the deep ocean. This is something that is not offered everywhere around the world, and it's something to give you a glimpse of what it looks like to be in the deep sea. So I want to, again, thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Steve, for joining us today. Thank you, Ocean Networks Canada, for this continuing series of Surfacing Secrets. Explore the ocean, know the planet. It is something that is very special to me to be able to collaborate with this organization because they do such amazing work. So thank you so much for that. Looking forward to next month when we're going to dive into more Ocean Networks Canada. So I want to thank Steve. I want to thank Lawrence. I want to thank Ocean Networks. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.